José Chavez from Comillas University in Madrid, and we are the operating agent of the ISGAN Academy. Welcome to this webinar. I just want to give some of information about ISGAN. So ISGAN is the International Smart Grid Action Network, and this is a strategic, high-level government platform to accelerate the deployment and development of smarter, cleaner electricity grids around the world. So ISGAN is also an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, and together with the International Energy Agency, it's a technology collaborative program of this agency. The Clean Energy Ministerial is the only multilateral forum dedicated exclusively to clean energy technologies and related topics, and ISGAN is the only global government-to-government forum for smart grids. So currently we have 25 participant countries. We have also invited country Malaysia and countries that have expressed their interest to join ISGAN, so the United Emirates, as well as lately the United Kingdom as well. So you have here all the 25 countries, and they are spread out in different continents. Furthermore, I just want a brief introduction to some of the activities we do in ISGAN. So we have 7 different annexes. So these are working groups working from different topics, as you can see here, from drivers for smart grids and best practices, cost-benefit analysis, tools to evaluate the impact and policy messages, also protocols and best practices, as well as power system scenarios and system solutions, then societal changes and smart grid systems, and this late part that is the ISGAN Academy. So we do some training, and we look for interesting topics such as the one presented today, and the idea is to keep updated on smart grids topics. So just this brief introduction, and I will give now the word to Luis. He is one of the presenters of the GARPUR ISGAN webinar.
Thank you very much. So my name is Louis Winkel. I'm professor at the University of Liège and scientific advisor of the GARPUR project. I will introduce this webinar. And so the program for today is, after this short introduction, I will explain the main ideas behind the probabilistic approach developed in GARPUR and how this translates in different application contexts from real-time operation to system development. And then the main part of the webinar will focus on the results of the pilot tests with 3 presentations by respectively Gudjon, Pascal and Arnaud. And finally, I will give a brief summary of the recommendations that come out of the GARPUR project. So before I go into this introduction, I just would like to remind that this is the second webinar that we have presented under the ISGAN Academy. And so on this slide, you will find the contents of the previous webinar, and of course we try to avoid too much redundancy between the two, so that we are just only going to remind the most essential part. So in terms of this, I would like to recall that the purpose of GARPUR is really to develop new probabilistic reliability management approaches and criteria with the goal of balancing correctly the level of reliability and the costs that are incurred by TSOs or other entities to reach this level of reliability. And so the end target is to be able to reduce the socioeconomic costs and still maintaining, of course, the desired level of reliability of supply. And so in the project, we have developed these new approaches, and we have also evaluated their practical uses. And in particular, you will see this in the presentations of the results of the pilot test. I should also recall that the goal of GARPUR is to cover in a coherent way the three main types of contexts where reliability management is carried out by TSOs, namely power systems operations, asset management, and system development. And these problems, of course, span different time horizons from very short-term real-time operation to rather long-term in system development, for instance. So this slide summarizes the overall approach of GARPUR. You see in the upper part the development of probabilistic reliability management framework, and in the lower part, development of a socioeconomic impact evaluation framework. And this should be applicable over the three contexts that I've just mentioned, from system development, asset management, and power system operation. And in the project, we have developed new criteria and also a prototype quantification platform. And one of the pilot tests presented later on by Pascal is based on using this quantification platform in order to compare from a socioeconomic point of view the N-1 classical reliability criterion used today in practice with the new probabilistic approach developed in GARPUR. Finally, based on these developments, the GARPUR project has developed a roadmap for the deployment of new reliability criteria at the pan-European level, and the last part of the presentation will focus on a very quick summary of that roadmap. So I will present the main idea behind the probabilistic approach in GARPUR. On this slide, you see three curves, and you have the blue curve on which I will start to focus. And so imagine that the system operator is applying the N-1 criterion in real-time operation. This would lead to a certain operating cost. Now, suppose that he would apply N-2 instead of N-1, in principle getting a more reliable system. That, of course, would lead to increased cost, and vice versa. If he relaxes criterion, the operating cost would be smaller. On the other hand, if you look at the red curve, this curve schematically represents how the total economic risk implied by power interruptions is evolving, depending on whether you cover only N-1 contingencies or more or less. And again, obviously, even if you cover the N-1 contingencies, some other contingencies may occur with a certain probability, and also maybe the system could respond in a different way than the one that you have assumed when simulating N-1 contingencies, so that there is always some risk of service interruptions, and this can be quantified in economic terms as an expected cost of service interruptions. So then if you look at the total overall socioeconomic impact of operating the system, this is the sum of the two curves here in brown. You see that in this particular diagram, N-1 looks like being a good choice, since it leads to the smallest overall socioeconomic cost, the sum of the two others. Now, if the system operating conditions change, these curves can change as well. And so you see here, for instance, imagine that there is a sudden drop of renewable energy output, then maybe the total risk curve will not really change, but the operating costs would possibly increase a lot if you still want to maintain the N-1 criterion, so that the optimum on the brown curve goes to the left, and so maybe under these conditions it would be more appropriate to not comply with all N-1 contingencies, but with a smaller subset. And of course, if the weather is the extreme weather conditions, then the probability of multiple failures will increase, and also if there is an interruption, the consequences on the consumers who have no electricity will typically be worse if the weather is harsh than if the weather is mild, so that the total risk curve, the red curve, strongly increases, and in this case, N-1 criterion would be too optimistic, and you should rather add more contingencies to reach this optimum trade-off. So the bottom line of this is that depending on the conditions, actually in some cases we should cover less contingencies than N-1, and in other cases more contingencies than N-1. So the GARPUR project has developed a coherent methodology which allows to do this in such a way that we approach this socioeconomic optimum. So main conclusion is that we need to dynamically exploit all the information that is available in the particular context, let's say, for instance, in real time. And these information have to do with evaluating the socioeconomic cost of service interruptions, but also with probabilities of contingencies and other kind of failure modes, hidden failures, for instance. And also because in operation, more and more, there is a combination of preventive and corrective control that are used to operate the system. It's important to take into account the fact that corrective controls, which are taken just after the occurrence of a contingency, they are taken in under strong time pressure, and there might be some risk of failure of corrective control, so that even if everything was well prepared, the system is not able to, in the end, withstand the contingency. So that has also to be taken into account. And various factors will influence these probabilities and these costs, like weather conditions, of course, operating conditions if the system is in more stress conditions, and also let's say the fitness of the assets of the system. If you have well-maintained transformers and lines, normally their failure rates will be smaller than if you have less well-maintained lines. And so this already shows that asset management and maintenance in particular may have an impact on reliability in operation, and this should be taken into account as well. So without going into any mathematical formulation here, which can be found in our many deliverables that we have provided in the project, this led to the formulation of a series of stochastic optimization problems called the GARPUR RMAC. And these can be applied to the different problems that the TSOs have to solve, from system development, asset management, and system operation. So I will, each one of these contexts, discuss a little bit what's the problem addressed here. To start with system development, well, the purpose is to identify those transmission capacities. I mean, that's the main purpose. There are other tasks also, but needed in the future, and justify how we propose to provide them by a careful cost-benefit analysis. What kind of possibly additional line to be built, and what should be the capacity of that line, and of course, the larger the capacity, typically the better from the market point of view and also from the reliability point of view. but of course the higher the investment costs. And so the problem setting here is that you look at a target year or a series of target years over the future, let's say from 2025 to 2035. Then you have to screen the relevant future market and operating conditions over that horizon, identify possible bottlenecks in terms of market and reliability issues by basically simulating how the system would operate over these years, and from there determine, thanks to the expertise, of course, of the planning engineers and the results of these screening studies, whether and where to build new lines. And then you can compare the different lines or the different development options by cost-benefit analysis that would, again, see what would be the impact on operating the system, but also on maintenance activities over that study horizon for the different alternatives. So that would then allow you to assess basically the impact on market surplus and operating costs and possibly maintenance activities. So when you carry out these system development studies, it's very important that you model in a suitable way how the system would be operated over these future years and also how it would be maintained. And so in GARPUR, we do that modeling by introducing the concept of a proxy. I will come back on this also during the next two applications. So quickly, asset management, which is a very important activity, especially because the power system components come closer to their end of life. Most of the lines and transformers that we have in the transmission system are several tens of years old already. And so it's quite important to analyze how much and where to invest in maintenance and replacement. So how often should we do the maintenance and where should we do it in the best way, and also, of course, the replacement of some of the older equipment. And then, let's say, once you know how much of these activities you want to plan for the future, maybe future 10 or 20 years, you also have to be able to carry them out, which means that you have to be able to take some of the equipment out of operation for carrying out the maintenance or replacement activities. And so while these activities will, after they are carried out, typically increase the reliability of the system, during the maintenance of operation, when there is an outage, of course, the reliability level of the system goes down. And so the idea is that you should do these outages at the moment where this impact on operation, so this combination of operating costs and expected costs of service interruptions is, let's say, the least negative. So again, we have looked at two different problems here in the GARPUR project. The problem over longer horizons of 20 to 30 years, where we want to determine maintenance activities, how much maintenance and replacement has to be done, and on that time scale, it's very important to be able to predict the impact of maintenance and component usage and climatic conditions on component aging. And then the other sub-problem on which we have worked is the problem of scheduling, typically on a yearly basis, required activities like inspection, repairing, and replacement in the least intrusive way in terms of impact on system operation. And so again here, when we want to assess how good a certain maintenance policy is for our system, or how good a certain outage schedule is for the next year, it's important to be able to model in a sufficiently accurate way how the system would be operated over the next year or the next 2 decades, including, if you look at the longer term problem, how the outages required by our maintenance policy would be scheduled over the next 20, 30 years. So of course this leads to complex problems where we basically again use a kind of Monte Carlo approach where we simulate the behavior of the system over very long time horizons, while modeling through suitable proxies how the operator and the outage planner would do their work in future conditions. And finally, the last class of problems on which we have, of course, worked concern system operation, where the question is to take decisions in operation planning maybe a few hours or a few days ahead in time, up to real time. And in this case, the point is to optimize the balance between operating costs and the risk of power supply interruptions, as I have explained in my first set of slides with my 3 types of curves. And so here we have looked at 2 problems: the real-time operation problem, where the point is to take into account current operating and weather conditions to evaluate risks of power supply interruptions over a relevant set of possible contingencies and to mitigate them. And in look-ahead mode, operation planning, where the point is to prepare real-time operation to ensure robustness with respect to uncertainties in load, renewable infeed market, and weather conditions. So there, in look-ahead mode, you can still postpone some maintenance, some outages planned for maintenance, or you could possibly reduce the capacities given to the market if you think that the weather conditions will be extreme and it is better to reduce a little bit the distance from generation to consumption. And so again, of course, we need to ensure that when the operation planner takes his decisions, he's really looking at the future days or future hours, while taking into account the way the system operator would take his own decisions in operation. So we need also a proxy of real-time operation when we do operation planning. So this finishes my introduction with the following slides, where these different Russian dolls basically represent the different contexts, let's say from the extreme right part, where we have the automatic response of the system, and then we have real time going progressively towards the left part of the slide. Real-time operation planning, maybe midterm outage scheduling, and so on and so on. So with that, I give the word to Gudjon for the presentation of the results from near real-life pilot testing at Landsat. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Louis. In this webinar, I will quickly go through the results of Landsat pilot test by answering these 3 questions. So is the computation fast enough? Does the output make any sense? And how sensitive are the outputs? Description of the pilot test implementation and methods can be found in detail in the first webinar of this series. But here is a short overview of the Icelandic system and the model. The Icelandic system is small and thus manageable for a pilot test like this. The model we used contains 85 buses, 107 branches, 71 generators, and it has 65 loads. The pilot was programmed with performance in mind from the start, but not maybe opted against, since we felt it was more important that it would work and be simple to debug and validate the
outcome. The pilot was built in MATLAB using math power and IPBOT with additional auxiliary tools made in Python and outputs and displays written in HTML and JavaScript. For computation, we used a normal desktop computer. Here are the specs for the computer we used. It has 10 cores and a larger memory, but we can say it's a reasonable personal computer. And on this graph, we can see the calculation time in seconds for 100 different pilot tests. The blue part represents the time it takes to get and modify inputs for the pilot, and this is done in series, so we are not utilizing all the 10 cores. The green is the system response, and so the pilot test itself, and here we utilize all of the 10 cores of the computer at 100%. And the small yellow bit is the time it takes to prepare plots and outputs for each test. On average, it takes 56 seconds to calculate each test case. We feel there is a lot of room for improvement to make this even go faster. For example, this blue part can be done on a different computer or done more in parallel. To visualize the outputs, we developed an internal web page which is accessible for everyone within Landsnet. When we started this pilot test, we really didn't have a good feeling of how to represent the outputs in a meaningful way to the operators, and it was difficult to view this picture quickly. And after a while, we found that the best way was this picture here, this graph here, for realizing the present state of the system. The y-axis shows estimated interruption costs, and x-axis hourly contingency probability, and with risk as contours on the graph. The map shows 10 worst contingencies, and it's really easy to compare each one of the contingencies and see where you're at each moment. And here the operator can see the impact of, for example, an incoming storm, where the blocks start to move to the right on the graph. This figure is the same as the previous one, but it shows how you can sort of categorize the contingencies that you have and see if it represents what you feel for each one of them. If you know that something is rare and has high impact, it should be in the box marked with A, high impact, low probability. And if it would move to the right into the high risk zone, you might want to check in on that. On this graph, you can see how the pilot responds to weather data compared to no weather data. Weather being the largest threat to the Icelandic system. For this graph, there's an incoming storm, and the probabilities of a contingency increase and the risk increases, and so the pilot analyzes more cases. And we feel that this represents what the operator is thinking in the control room, and from experience he knows that it's more likely for things to happen in storms than in calm weather. And we also compared the risk with and without system integrity protection schemes. In our system, we have a couple of those schemes in place. We found that in some cases the risk was greatly overestimated if they were not taken into account. This graph shows an example of such comparison, where the orange lines show the risk without system integrity protection, and the blue line with it. The pilot showed that this can be done. This can be calculated for near real time, without using huge computers. The output represents the operator's feel for the system and impacts of threats. And in most cases, the outputs agree with experts, but we admit that we still have some bugs and we sometimes have something weird going on. We see that there's a need for validate the individual models of the pilot test and of the methods proposed in GARPUR. And for future improvement, there's a need for a fast estimation of dynamic events. And that concludes my talk, and I hand it over to Pascal.
Okay, thank you, Pascal from RT R&D. So I will present you the RT test case study using the GARPUR quantification platform prototype. So first, the pilot test objectives, then the GARPUR, the GQP main features of the test, and the test and closing remarks. The pilot test objectives were to highlight the differences between the classical M-1 reliability management criteria and the more probabilistic ones using the GQP, and to assess risk management on operation, but this on an illustrative real example, in order to highlight the challenges for further appropriation by the TSOs. Regarding the problematic considered, we are dealing with congestion flow management on the southeast region of France, and we focus more precisely on the so-called Tavel-Rialto corridor, which has been responsible for 2/3 of RTE congestion costs in 2013, and we will look on risk management derived decisions versus real-time decisions. So in yellow, you can see the Tavel-Rialto corridor, which is formed by two ISV lines, and in brown you have alternative paths, alternative electrical path, and the purpose here is to balance the flows on those different paths in order to supply the load in the blue zone, which could be very problematic due to the fact that generation is limited in the blue zone. You have also to consider seasonal aspect on the renewable energy sources variations in the blue zone. Today, the present operating rule is that we take into account preventively the M-2 Tavel-Rialto, but this depending on weather conditions. For example, if we anticipated storms or fires in summer, for example. Considering the GQP features for the test, we have used the possibility to import at the SIM format direct congestion forecast files, and we have given to the GQP CSV complementary files describing, for example, the sentences. We use a two-level optimization problem for arbitration between preventive and corrective actions to build preventive solution. The GQP uses a complex mixed integer linear program solver in order to model those arbitrations, to take into account TSO acceptability constraints on the solution given by the GQP, to model generation startup, fast shifters, topology shifts, and to model also failure of corrective actions. The computations are done using the DC direct current approximations, but they are AC checks in order to validate those computations performed in DC. So we use the three-step approach provided by the GQP. So first, we build preventive solution for a specific RMAC and a specific set of contingencies. This based on the best forecast which is given by the DSCF file. And then we use uncertainties we have around the forecast in order to build adjustment, real-time preventive adjustment of the direct preventive solutions. And we finish by a last stage corrective problem, which is performed on a larger set of contingencies. So when we sum up the three costs, the direct preventive cost, the real-time preventive cost, and the last one, the corrective cost, we have the total cost quantification which is associated to the RMAC. For comparison, we have defined four RMACs comparative problems, which are the N-0 problem. So we don't consider the contingency to be the preventive solution. The classical N-1 problem, only N-1 contingencies are considered to build the preventive solution, but with the same probability and without authorizing a trade-off between preventive and corrective actions in order to build the preventive solution. And we have also two statistical RMACs. The first one, which is called RMAC N-1, and in this one we consider only N-1 contingencies, but we use their probabilities and we authorize the trade-off with corrective actions in order to find preventive solutions. And we have also RMAC N-2 problem, which is similar but with the addition of N-2 contingencies in the problem in order to build the preventive solution. And we finish for all the RMACs by the same last stage corrective problem, which is identical, which gives us the residual risk estimation considering the effect of a preventive solution. So we have defined first a base case parametrization in order to compare the four different RMACs on a fair basis. And then we have performed complementary sensitivity tests in order to highlight the impact of the contingency failure rates, the uncertainties around the forecast, the TSO acceptability constraints and failure of corrective actions impacts, control action plus more N-K contingencies to be put into the problem. On the base case parametrization test, we have put into evidence the fact that the N-0 problem could be over costly. This is due to the fact that the residual risk is not mastered for this problem. If we compare now the N-1 problem in green to the RMAC N-1 problem in blue, we can see that the N-1 problem could be over costly compared to the RMAC N-1 problem, and this for a similar control of the residual risk. But for the RMAC N-2 problem, we have a fact that this problem is over costly than other RMACs for no better control of the residual risk. if we look now at the tests which have been performed on sensitivity to on contingency failure rates, we have multiplied the failure rates by 10 in order to simulate the effects of adverse weather conditions. So we can see that the N-0 problem, which is normal, is getting worse. For the RMAC N-1 problem, we can see it tends to mimic exactly the N-1 problem, which was expected. For the RMAC N-2 problem is always over costly for not a better control of the residual risk. In this test, we have looked at the effect of uncertainties around the forecast, and we have observed a good stability of the behavior of the RMAC N-1 problem, but if we look at the box plot on the RMAC N-2 problem, we can see that this one was oversensitive to uncertainties. So to finish, I will say that there are some sensitive issues to consider in order to perform such duties. We have used the GQP, which was a research-grade prototype, and you have to consider performance and tractability issues, but also result interpretation and validation. Could be also interesting to deal with a more complex RMAC implementation, such as taking into account uncertainties in the direct preventive problem, taking into account larger problem, taking into account reactive and dynamic phenomena, and also multi-TSO interactions. Regarding the data, we have observed that a high sensitivity of the RMAC to the blackout costs, the failure rates, and failure of corrective actions. And we think that if we can reach a better confidence in the estimations of those three parameters, it will ease further acceptance of the RMAC by the TSOs. And regarding the benefits of the approach, we can say that the RMAC N-1 problem is well positioned and is consistent with intuitions. Regarding the introduction of N-K contingencies, N-2 or N-3 contingencies in the preventive problem, there should be economically weighted and justified. But we can also say that high preventive costs could be justified in case of difficult operational conditions. I will let the room to Arnold Vergniaud for ELIA test. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. I will take you about the result of a pilot test case for the system development. So the goal of this test case is to integrate in the tools used by ELIA the approach developed in GARPUR and to compare this approach with the current approach used by ELIA. The most important aspect is the screening of operating states. In the challenge in the system development context is that we have no certainties on evolution of regulatory frameworks or on the fuel price, or on the generation mix and localization. So it's necessary to consider all likely futures, and the exploration of several futures required to generate a lot of operating states. But after to generate this operating state, it's necessary to have a methodology to assess the robustness of a network for each of these operating states. This method must be taking into account the action of the operator in real time to keep the link between system development and short-term activities. So due to this challenge, we purpose of this workflow in Work Package 4. The purpose of this webinar is not to detail this workflow,
more information is available in the GARPUR website, in the deliverable. The rest of this presentation will concentrate on the orange box. This box is divided into 2 steps. The first step makes it possible to reduce the number of credible operating states, and the second makes it to find the critical operating state to send to the planner. For the first step, for the reduction of number of credible operating states in ELIA, for the regional study, for example, 70 kV, which shows only 5 operating states to cover extreme situations, for example, peak load or no decentralized production, or opposite, low load and peak of decentralized production. But for the European studies, in the extra high voltage, we shows 100 operating states. The main idea behind the selection method is that the duration curve for each of the inputs must be adequately covered, is shown in the figure in this slide. Because in a GARPUR project, we use the K-means algorithm in the software MATLAB and for regional and European study and so on. For the second step, we to find the critical operating states. Actually, in ELIA, you perform a security analysis for all N-1 situations, but we don't estimate the cost to solve the constraints. And all operating states that have constraints are kept for more accurate evaluation by planner. In GARPUR approach, we use a securities constraint optimal power flow called OTS, developed by University of Strathclyde. OTS make it possible to calculate the cost necessary to avoid constraints in N and N-1 situation. And all the operating states that have operating costs are kept for more accurate evaluation. These 2 approaches for these 2 steps are tested on this network. This network will have 8 70 kV substations. The needs of this network is the end of life of the 70 kV line and to integrate the wind production, because here the potential of wind is equal to 400 MVA. After to present the comparison, I show you the results for security constraint optimal power flow on all data, all full set data in 1 year. And so here you are 14% of operating states are insecure. This point is secure if you curtail the wind production, but this curtailment generates an operating cost of 450 kilo per year, and this cost take into account the probability to have an N-1 situation. And if you go to the next slide, here to compare the 2 approaches, the approach in ELIA and the approach in K-means, and to keep the cluster number to equal to 100. For both methods, the size of a different cluster is not identical. One cluster is represented to 0.%, and the last cluster to present 2.5%. But it's the same for the 2 methods. The main difference is linked to the representativeness for the central point of the cluster. And for the K-means algorithms, the representativeness is better to comparing with the ELIA approach. And if you go to the comparison with the step 2 to identify the critical operating state, if you to take one 100 cluster, the two methods give an almost equivalent number of critical centuries to be analyzed by the planner. But it's important to note the method used by ELIA overestimates the operational cost, whereas the K-means algorithm leads to an underestimation of operational cost, and you find the relative error in this table. In conclusion, one final element is the K-means algorithm is more faster comparing with ELIA method. In conclusion, the K-means algorithm is a plausible alternative to the current method, and it's used in ELIA since the beginning of September. And the all pilot test case has shown that the method developed under our package 4 in GARPUR project can be used within the TSO business. Thank you for your attention. I give the floor to Louis to present the all recommendation.
Yes, thank you. For the sake of time, I will go very quickly through these slides because we would like to leave a little bit of time for questions. So the recommendation of the GARPUR project, now that the project reaches its end, first of all, we are convinced that probabilistic reliability management should be adopted by all stakeholders dealing with electric power systems reliability management. And these recommendations are based on the findings of the project, and we have clustered them into 4 different categories. First of all, regulation and socioeconomic considerations. So these recommendations span over a period of from 5 to 10 years. We have further work to be done specifically by TSOs and so in order to better understand the benefits and the distribution effects and the needed investments. We also need introduction of regulatory changes if we want to move away from N-1 towards a probabilistic approach, and the proper incentives to do that in the best way. And finally, with a new approach, a new way of coordinating reliability management practices in Europe is also needed. Then obviously, the new approach will need additional data, and modes has been already stressed and found out in the pilot test that to gain confidence, we need to make sure that these data about probabilities, costs of service interruptions, and so on should be as accurate as possible. And of course, in order to allow a TSO in an interconnected system to apply the approach, he also needs data from neighboring TSOs, so there need to be guidelines, additional guidelines for collecting, maintaining, and sharing the data and the probabilistic models among TSOs. And of course, in the project, we have developed a certain number of prototype softwares like probabilistic scope approaches and reliability assessment methodologies, as you have seen. But of course, these software have to be now become mature, and therefore we need also investment from technology providers and further progress in terms of research as well. And finally, we recommend progressive approach in order to improve the knowledge and testing and gain confidence. So therefore, we would like to have the research community to use open source test cases and software so that we can really reproduce the results, and TSOs should go on further with pilot scale testing and in as many as possible organizations and the different contexts from long-term to real-time. And of course, as you might understand, these approaches, especially for the longer-term problems, will need massive numbers of simulations using Monte Carlo-like approaches, and therefore we need to ensure that the proper high-performance ICT infrastructures is available for TSO. So for more information, please go on the web page of our GARPUR project, where we can get lots of details about all these works, the public deliverables. And also I would like to inform you that we have the final conference of the project on Tuesday and Wednesday, October 17-18 in Brussels, where we'll present the results of the project in one day, and in the next day discuss how to move towards real-world application of all these results in the future years. So that ends my presentation. Thank you very much.